Hey, Chris, I'm not going to be able to make the game tonight. I know it's only a few hours before. I'm kind of sorry about that.
Uh, that's too bad. So, all right. So you're kind of sick or something, and
Yeah, yeah, I'm not feeling so great. Yeah, just play without me. Just play without me. I'm 100% sure something like this has happened to you before. As a game master, oftentimes life gets in the way of your games.
player absence can be a real problem. But there's different creative way to deal with it. I am Chris.
And I'm Matt.
Welcome to Roleplay Chat.
We're two game masters who just can't stop talking about role playing games.
And today we talk about player absence.
Our conversation today is going to be a little bit more freeform. We're not exactly sure where it's going to take us, but some things that we definitely want to talk about are first and foremost, how do you ensure that players don't miss games in your campaign, or strategies that you can do to avoid having people miss games altogether?
And when it happens, because life happens, how do we try to deal with the problem at least?
hmm So I think that covers most of what we're going to cover today, Chris.
Yes, Matt.
Let's role
Roleplay
play chat.
Chat.
So the first thing we're going to talk about today, as we mentioned before, is how do you set up your game or your campaign rather to avoid having your players be absent or have a less impact,
Yeah,
you
so
know.
it's not a problem, and you can still play and not have to reschedule or cancel or something like
hmm hmm
that. So I think we've had that problem in my campaign, especially at the beginning, because it was really about I was calling everybody like, what's the next date? I think it was Facebook we were using,
hmm
or emails. I don't remember, and I would send like, here's the 3 dates I was thinking about, and then people were like, yes, I can, yes, I. And it would often end up that I have 5 players that at least one
Couldn't make it.
couldn't make it. And I was like, okay, are we playing four, or am I trying to find another date? It's not even that we had a date and someone at the last minute was canceling. It was hard to find a date.
Yeah.
And something, even if I had the 5 players, then life happens sometimes, and someone would cancel, often last minute, by last day, and then I'd have to make a judgment call.
hmm
And I'm not super decisive, so sometimes I'd call someone and be like, "So this happened. Do you think we should play? Do you think we shouldn't play?" And then I would like cross-reference with everybody. It's kind of a nightmare of organizing all this.
Yeah, well, I know, and it can be a struggle, right? Especially when you're not playing too often. I think at that point we were playing once every couple of weeks,
Hmm.
maybe even once a month in the worst times.
We were trying to play every 2 weeks, but it would come up often once a month
Yeah,
because of that exact problem.
and I know like you said, you were scheduling them kind of one game at a time, and
Hmm.
I think that's where we came up with a pretty interesting solution. Maybe you've thought of doing this for your games, but we came up with what was kind of like a registration system
Hmm.
where we would set up 5 games every 2 weeks for a period of two months, let's say, or maybe 3 months, and all the players would either commit to those days or say, you know what, I'm going on vacation. I don't think it makes sense for me to be a part of this session. I'll sign up next time.
Yeah, so I think some people do the thing where it's like we play every week or we play every 2 weeks, and it's fine. But our group at least have a busy life, so
Mm-hmm.
that way you can. It seems easier to deal with. It's 5 weeks. You
You
commit to
commit to
that,
it.
and if
Yeah.
you want to break, and what's good with it, we found is the fact that the game master can also take a break if you've done like 3 of these season, as we call, and you've done 15 games and you want to take a little break, you can take those 5 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
5 games, and someone else can game master in their own thing and go back and forth. So that's really cool. And I found that having this commitment, people would cancel less, and it would, for me, it removes so much problems of, because the game master is already responsible for the game. Most of the time he or she is hosting,
Uh-huh.
and sometimes the food, it's everything, and on top of that, it's finding the date. It's a lot to put on one person. That way, it's kind of a communal agreement that
Mm-hmm.
if someone misses out, like it's everybody's problem.
Yeah. Another mitigation strategy I find to avoid the impacts of absences is to kind of do the opposite, where you kind of embrace the fact that there's going to be absences. So you purposefully include a larger number of players in your basin of people in the campaign. So in terms of active players, maybe your campaign's going to be running with 7 or 8 people, but that's under the pretense that every time you play, 2 or 3 of those people are probably not going to be able to make it. I've run something similar to this when I was playing with coworkers. We just had a bunch of people after work, and I said, every other Friday I'm going to be playing a game. I'm going to be game mastering a game of Dungeons and Dragons. If you want to play, you can play, and if you don't, that's cool. It doesn't really matter to me.
Hmm.
And that kind of set up an interesting dynamic where some Friday nights we were 7 people at the table, and other times we would just be 3 or 4.
Did you find yourself sometime rejecting people, be like, okay, we're too many, or you would
I
actually
would
play with?
I would just allow anyone that wanted to
That's
play. It was hard.
Yeah, that's probably hard.
It I'll be honest with you guys, it wasn't as intricate of a campaign as something that we might
Yeah,
expect.
and it's not character
It's not
driven.
character driven
There's
whatsoever.
it depends, I guess, on the game a lot, but
Yeah.
it's an interesting way to do it. I think for me, the right balance in what I'm trying to go towards is to have like a subbing system,
Hmm.
to have a core, maybe 5 people, and depending on how many people you want at your table. For me, I prefer 4, 3 even, but 4 is good, and I'm okay with 5. That way, if someone's missing, then I have like 2 people maybe
Hmm.
that are, they have their character made, they know kind of the story, they can come in, fill in the blank, and it doesn't stop anyone from playing.
Hmm.
Otherwise, if
Hmm.
you don't have that priority, then it's I wouldn't be comfortable running for 7 people, but I would
Hmm.
like to have 7 people on
Want to
hold.
play? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I kind of do, but I need people to be like, I want to play, but I don't mind not playing as often as the game is running, if
Yeah.
that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Another obvious mitigation strategy, it might seem obvious, I guess, to me. I think it's important to talk to your players about absences and how you expect their commitment, like how firm is the commitment for your game. Um,
Yes.
if if one of my friends who's gonna run a game tells me, "Hey, Matt, I really expect the people to sign up for this to be here every other week for the next 5 months," at least I know as a player, like, okay, I know what the expectation is, and if I can't make it to your game, it needs to be, not needs to be, but it ought to be a really good reason, like I'm very sick, or I have like a wedding that just popped up that I had to go to, or something like this.
Hmm.
Um, and by setting that expectation, I think it makes everybody happy. If you just say, "Hey, we're gonna play a game every Friday. You want to come play?" and then that person's like, "Yeah, sure, I want to play," but then something else pops up that's maybe higher priority to them,
Hmm.
and you've never had this conversation of how you expect them to be present, they might say, "Hey, my coworker's having a birthday party. Sorry, I can't come," and then they go to that instead.
Yeah, my in-laws want to see us, and it's not a really a special occasion or anything, and
Hmm.
the scale of when it's okay to cancel a game, at least as a player, not to go, needs to be clear for sure.
And maybe you're fine with that. Maybe you're not. I just think it's important to let people know that right from the
Hmm.
get go when they're signing up to play.
Yeah, that's why also this signing up system is interesting, because you kind of have to have this discussion.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
not going to be casually thrown like, oh, we're going to hang out and everything. Because sometimes the problem is for people that are not into role playing game that much, and you start a new game and you want to bring people in,
Yeah.
and you tell them that, they don't know that you take it, well, at least I take it seriously, as like I want it to happen in the best way possible.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it feels, I guess, not wrong, but it feels overly nerdy to be like, we're playing D&D and it's very important to me.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't want to like scare them off, but at the same time, if you don't do that, you have to be okay with
Them potentially not coming.
not coming because something that you don't think is that important
Yeah.
came up.
Another tool that you could use that I used to use a lot, especially when I was planning games kind of one at a time, was I would use a system called Roll20, or not, sorry, not Roll20. I used a free website called Doodle. Maybe I'll put a link in the bottom in the doobly doo down below if I remember to do so. And it's basically a scheduling app where all of the players can put in the days that they're available independently from one another, and then it spits out the day that everybody clicked as available.
So basically, what I was doing, calling each other and trying to organize it,
Yeah.
the app does it. So yeah, that's probably a good way to avoid a waste of time.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens if there's no crossover?
That's the thing, right? If there's no crossover, then you kind of have to make the decision as the game master the day that works better for you, basically, because you're the one essentially putting the game on. But it's just something that you might want to consider using if having that kind of expectations conversation is maybe a little bit too intimidating, or you're afraid of how it might scare people off from your games.
Yeah, I think that covers the mitigation kind of aspect of it, how you try to avoid it as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
But life happens. But what happens if you still want to play? You have one player missing, maybe even two player missing. We're going to talk about how we deal with the problem. There's different ways to do.
Mm-hmm. So, Chris, let me start by asking you. If you have players, one or two players, that can't make your game, and you still want to have your game run, what are some things that you do, or what's your favorite solution for this problem to continue playing and have a game that's still plot relevant, still moves the story forward?
For me, hands down, my favorite way to deal with it is to find an interesting reason, or at least a reasonable reason, for the character to not be there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it means you need to be at a point in the story where it makes sense. For instance, we have the Blood and Betrayal campaign, where the last game we mentioned the fact that in episode 5, Diedrich wasn't there when they went in the Skaven lair.
Mm-hmm.
I won't go into the details, but essentially his motivation, it made sense for Diedrich not to go there with the group. So it was okay that you, the player, missed that game.
And I can't remember why I missed it, but really, there was no way I was going to make it.
Yeah, no, I don't remember the reason, but it was at this time we weren't scheduling, and I think we planned the game knowing you wouldn't be there, and it would make sense. So for me, I have no problem. I actually find that it helps the story. It feels more real because your character wouldn't want to go with them in the sewers in that situation. So why would you go just for party, whatever?
Yeah.
So I really like that. And then it opens up other opportunity of seeing what are you doing while this story is going forward. And we're going to talk about it a little bit more. But that time I decided to make you play a one-on-one with me where we would role play together what you did while the story was going on. And it created a cool moment and a character evolution that made sense in the story. And it will happen multiple times in the story where people are missing the game and the character leaves and comes back with a background evolution that makes sense. And it's okay that we did not go through it.
And it actually, like you're saying, it enhances the experience. So I think one tool that you guys can try to take from this is, if someone can't be there, find a way to, send that player character somewhere that makes sense for them to go in terms of their motivation or the story. Maybe even talk to that player and say, okay, you can't be here. We're about to go into the dungeon or into the, the tavern or whatever reason. What do you want to do instead? Mm-hmm. Where will your character go? How can we take your absence and actually evolve from it. And then, like you're saying, it adds to it in the sense that Diedrich, when I returned to the players, I was different. I had something that I could role play. We could interact with each other where they would say, "Whoa, what happened? Why are you like this? Why are you like that?" And then it just helps drive the story forward, in addition to all the information that was given to me in the first place.
And what was great for me about this is I knew this thing was going to happen to you, like something that would only make sense to happen to you.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want to have a game where the other four are there to see you do that thing. Like it was too centric for your character to have other player there. But at the same time, if we play every week and everyone's there, then like I don't have the opportunity to make your character evolve in its own ways. So it was really, for me, it was actually a relief that time to organize that thing. In other occasion, it's really a juggling act where I like the mental exercise of having the game, having to have like dots and connect them in a way that makes sense. But it isn't like it's work, and some people might like it, some people might not. But for me, I like the fact if I know enough in advance and the story is at a point where it makes sense, I actually enjoy having this challenge, as long as it doesn't ruin the game. Like if we have only two people, and the thing that when it doesn't work, it's when you stop kind of in the middle of combat. So
yeah, or in the middle of like a dungeon delve or something. That becomes tricky.
Yeah, it
and
can
then
just be like, I'm leaving.
You could maybe have one of the other strategies that we have here is can you maybe get somebody else to play that character? So, or is that okay? Do you have more to say about?
No, I think it's good to switch now. I think it's the next best thing, but kind of have to be careful. I think it's obvious stuff like, oh, you just play that character, but I think it's what might not be obvious is who plays that character. Is it the game master? Is it the player?
And I've actually heard some people. I'm not exactly sure where I stand on this opinion, but some people have very strong opinion about allowing the game master to play a character. In part,
really?
Yeah, in part, and I can understand is that because the game master has so much going on already, they know so much information, it becomes difficult for them to have a truly unbiased opinion about what that character's actions ought to be. Even if the game master is trying their very best to be unbiased, there's a little bit of that bias that might slip in. So it becomes really, really hard for them to do it. If you know where the information is and you're playing the really like investigator, sneaky character, how are you going to know like
what to not do?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think it's, for me, it's almost, and the other side of the coin is if a player is playing the character, the problem is if you do a bad choice and something happens and it triggers a trap and something horrible happens, I feel like it's not good sportsmanship for the game master to
harm severely
exactly a character whose player is not actually there. So it kind of creates that kind of weird plot armor where it's.
So what Chris is saying is, if you don't want to die before a big final boss, don't show up.
Don't show up, exactly. Well, it kind of happened to me when at the last encounter, one of our players wasn't there and someone else was playing, like someone who only had that character to play. And I was like, I can't really, like as a game master, I'm like, I can't really kill that character now because it would be kind of.
It would be hard to justify it or.
Yeah. So, but what I like to do is, outside of combat, I think the game master should control the character, and in combat it should be another player because otherwise it's too much. I think, I don't know about you, I think that's the common way to do it.
Yeah, I'm also, I don't want to say I'm a fan of it because I feel like it's a really simple and almost too simple solution, but to do the whole like you become a following NPC solution. Especially in a situation where you're like, okay, you're in a big dungeon, there's maybe not that much for you to do, so you're gonna guard the cart, or you're just gonna kind of follow along and watch the door and make sure nobody comes following you.
They can kind of use it as a puppet.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I know you guys have probably already have thought of doing that, so I don't want to dwell on it too much. But it is a solution. But I think like you're saying, Chris, it's a step better to allow somebody else to control that player to make actual actions.
Mhm.
Like you're saying, maybe have a substitute player come in and play that character, or a substitute player come in and play a different character, so that it doesn't kind of sway the balance of your combat, and then come up with like a small reason to send that other player away.
Mhm. There's the in the last A Storm of Ratman, I think that was kind of cool when we started and Diedrich, the player you played, wasn't
Mm-hmm.
there, but the player of
Another
Umgrim
character,
was
yeah,
not there. So I give it to you. The other players thought that today Matt is playing Umgrim. And that kind of led to a cool moment where you played Umgrim for the first
half
per
maybe,
half, let's say
yeah.
first half of the combat. And at one point he jumped and got stuck somewhere. And then you were kind of out of the combat as Umgrim. And that's when I brought Diedrich in.
Yeah.
And then you switched to Diedrich, and it created that moment where the players weren't expecting you to switch character in the middle, but you only had one character to deal with. So
Mm-hmm.
that was, I mean, I can't really say it's a tip for you guys because it's so
It's
specific.
very circumstantial.
Yeah, but it was cool.
Another thing you can try to do that I think is really fun is have your player who's going to be absent come up with a prop or some kind of contribution to the game that they can do off screen.
Hmm.
In one of our Blood and Betrayals, Diedrich wrote a letter to the party because I knew I wasn't going to be there. And the party was able to use Diedrich's information to kind of still progress, and it kind of made me feel like I was still a part of the adventure, and it justified my absence. So things you guys could do is similar things like have a letter, or even without a physical prop, you could talk to your player one on one and then get them to relay a message via a courier or a carrier pigeon or a raven or something, so that they still feel like they're contributing despite being gone.
Hmm. Yeah, that was really cool, and I mean, it's kind of homework a little bit,
A little bit, a little
but
bit.
like if your players don't mind, it adds a lot to the story and to an absence. And we're maybe something that is worth mentioning. We're talking about player absence in terms of like missing a whole session, but some of those tricks I've been using, and I think you too, as like if someone shows up late, like they're there 2 hours, 3 hours later, you find
Mm-hmm.
a reason, and then they arrive in the middle of the action. It can create other cool things. So don't see absence as totally negative. It can really be a springboard to interesting things.
Yeah, and like you're saying, some of the most interesting story reveals or plot twists or things like that kind of come from the player's ingenuity despite being absent.
Hmm.
So yeah, these props, these tools that you can bring forward. So I challenge you as a player, if you are a player who might have to miss a game, try to think of how you can. What can you bring to the game even if you're not there? Find a way to talk to your game master and see if there's a way for your contribution to still be relevant, um, and for your absence to make sense in the story
That's really a
unfolding.
good, like that's a gift for a game master to receive that from a player,
Hmm.
especially unprompted. You receive, like when you gave me that letter, I was like, that's cool. Now like I get a prop that I can
Yeah.
give them. It's really nice. I feel like we have to talk about the other way to deal with it. The way of it just the character just disappears
Hmm.
and
Nobody asks
nobody
questions.
asks questions. Yeah. What do you think about that?
And this might be an unpopular opinion, but I think it's a lazy solution to this problem. Um, I know we don't always have time to make props or to talk to our players or to get input like that, but I'm not a big fan of it. I think if you're reading a book, if you're watching a movie, if you're telling any kind of story, heroes, main characters don't just disappear. They don't disappear, and a role playing game is no different. It's
Hmm.
still a medium for a story to be told, and I think that the game master and the players should work together to prevent strange little plot holes like this from happening.
Hmm.
this is a perfect situation. I know that it happens. I'm guilty of making that happen. I know in one of our Rising Tide games,
Mhm.
I kind of hand waved and said, "Oh, he saw one of his gods and he was like shocked and he didn't speak for the whole day."
Well, that was finding a reason. It was not a great reason,
It was
but
not
you
the
did
best
find a
reason.
reason. But it was mostly like we couldn't interact with the character. And obviously, if a player is missing and you find a like someone else plays the character, as a player, don't go
Mhm.
interact with him and ask for like plot reveals. And obviously, it's kind of on hold.
Yeah, yeah.
But I feel like making a character just absent and then becomes
Reappears.
reappears. Yeah, I agree with you. Is it feels lazy, and I don't like saying that because some people that don't mind at all about all the story thing we're talking about might find it offensive.
Yeah, and we don't mean to offend anyone.
No,
Um,
it really depends on the type of game you want to run, and obviously if it works for a group and nobody cares,
yeah,
that's totally perfect. I care.
yeah, and I'll use one of my games as an example. The one that I talked about before with my coworkers when we were several people. That's what I did.
Oh yeah, you
You
you have
know,
to kind of like.
they didn't care.
Mhm,
The plot was not about their characters, so their
mhm,
decisions mattered, but their backstory their backstory didn't really matter very much
mhm.
to the whole what was going on. So that's what I would do. I would zoop zip zap, people would disappear, people would come back, and they didn't know any better and they had a blast.
Yeah, in this in the solution of having too many players and assuming people are going to be absent, it's going to be a nightmare to deal with
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Even with the system of the like the subbing system, it's I let's hope it doesn't happen often because it can be quite a juggling act. But
Hmm.
yeah, I think it's on the table. It's not a great solution, but it is
You
a
can do it.
solution.
Another solution that I think is pretty popular and a lot of fun is to kind of run like mini improvised games,
Oh, yeah.
especially if a lot of people can't make it, right? If
Hmm.
you're in a situation when you're five players, but three of those five players can't make it, and you just have two players left, one solution could be pull out a board game and play that. But
Hmm.
those people they want to play role playing games. And
Hmm.
I mean, as a game master, I do too.
Hmm. Yeah, you were. It's about expectations, right? All we're saying is talk to your players and everything. It's about fulfilling the expectation, and if they are there to play a role playing game, let's do it. It works for also improvised session. I had that happen to me one day. We
Hmm.
were actually I invited two of my friends to play board games, and they were like, you know what, we can like let's play the
Let's play
role
the
playing
game.
game.
Yeah.
Let's play the game. Like, well, you're only two players, and we're supposed to be five, and it's time for a side quest.
Yeah.
And that was great. And sometimes when people are missing, it might be worth it to like go a bit, like do a detour, not
Yeah.
to advance the story too much if you're missing too many too many players. What some people refer as the critical mass. But if everybody's up for it,
Why not?
why not?
And one thing that I've actually, if you don't know this about me yet, I really like one
Hmm.
shot games. And lately, over the past couple of years, most of my one shots are very loosely interconnected.
Hmm.
And the campaign that we're running now, or not now, but depending on when you're watching this or listening, the campaign we're running now, the Rising Tide campaign, is set kind of in the same matte cinematic universe as some of my players like to call it.
Yeah.
So I've actually come up with a few other of these one-shot games that take the players and like superimpose them into the skin of somebody else. And
Mm.
if you could make it to the game, Chris, but two of my other players could, I might tell them, "Hey, do you want to play in a different like not a side quest, but like a side plot that may or may not be important to the actual plot, but it continues to develop world building. It fleshes out maybe a faction that they don't know a lot about
Hmm.
that maybe isn't very present in the actual game that we're playing. So it kind of still feels like they're getting something out of it, but they're not totally influencing, or they're not influencing the main plot at all. Really.
So is it the same characters? Would
It
you?
might be, yeah. So like
Mhm.
for instance, there might be a faction. I'm gonna throw one out of my head. It might be like the Thieves Guild, or it might be one of the other pirate factions. So there's several other pirate factions that you guys interact with. You know a little bit about them. It would be fun for a player to know maybe what faction X is doing and what their motivations are. So one of these one-shot adventures might be them going on a quest to collect treasure, it might be them saving a village, it might be something like
Mhm.
this. And you get to interact, and actually as players, you would get the opportunity to further flesh out and develop some of the characters on that ship or in that faction, which I think could be kind of fun.
That's cool. And you're in terms of timeline, would you say it's parallel? It's probably like in the past.
Yeah,
Because
I have
I really
one that's
go ahead.
I have one that's I was hoping to run a couple of weekends ago when we were at the cottage, but it never
Mm,
happened. And it was actually concurrent to what was happening right now.
mm,
Um,
that's cool.
and then I have a few other ones where it's they're kind of like backstory for other pirates or other people in the world,
Mm.
so that maybe the next time you interact with them, you could, as your character in the campaign, have information about that person that maybe you know for other reasons. I don't
Yeah, I had the similar like thought about one of my players was saying like I don't feel the character, I don't know how I should play him, I don't and I talked to him and we talked about the possibility of actually going back in time and role playing through his youth,
know. Oh, cool.
like in fast forward and developing the action that was written in his backstories as
Like
actually
facts that
actually
he didn't know.
yeah,
Or, yeah.
exactly, and that's cool, and I feel like you could do that anytime. Like
Hmm.
you right now we're stuck. We're assaulting a boat in the rising tide. If next week some people don't show up, then maybe we could go back in the. You have two players. Let's say I have my player Edward and Mora who have a backstory together. We
Hmm.
could go back in time and reenact something that we know happened, but the details are not there. And you know what? You might obviously you're not gonna die because otherwise the
It wouldn't make
story
sense.
doesn't make sense. But it could be cool to like you get slashed and you have a scar now that is actually there in the future
Uh huh.
or anything like that helps flesh out the character.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's fun. It lets you explore different parts of the story that you didn't get the chance to explore before, and it's timeless. Not timeless, but it can happen whenever you want. Um,
Hmm.
Speaking to that, I think it could also be really cool. Maybe not really cool. I would enjoy as a player to play a random NPC
Mm.
to help that other person develop their player character. You know, maybe I'm one of their friends from back home that never left the village, or maybe I'm a town guard who you could bring up at another time and you could play as the game master.
Hmm.
But at least it allows me to help contribute to my fellow player character, my other friends' player character, still be a part of the game, still sit down and be there, but it doesn't force the game master to be in a situation where it needs to be a one-on-one
Hmm.
adventure. I
Yeah.
think that could be kind of fun, actually.
Yeah, and so if we clean that a little bit, what we're saying is if you have like let's say four players and two are missing, maybe instead of running the usual campaign, you could actually use something from your story,
Hmm.
either an NPC, either their backstory, and put the story on the side and still play in that same universe, same storyline,
Yeah.
but in a parallel way that adds to the main story and you can still get to play that day.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm sure the players, assuming they're very interested by the world you're playing in, I think would have a lot of fun.
All right. Well, that was a cool discussion. We didn't plan a lot of this in advance. We had some points, but I
Hmm.
think came up with cool things, and we might even try to incorporate more in our games.
Yeah, and I hope you guys found them useful. Some of the things that we talked about, we started off by talking about mitigation strategies to avoid having the issue of absences have a much of an impact on your games. So some of the things we mentioned included, setting expectations with your players or creating like a scheduling system so that you don't have to worry about when people are coming. They're always going to be coming at the same time. or within like a session of several months or 2 or 3 months at a time.
I think maybe something to mention that we forgot in the video is the fact that what's cool with that is also that normally it's the game masters that has to call everybody to schedule it, but if you know in advance, then it becomes the player responsibility to call the game master to cancel. So it shifts the responsibility, and that one of the major thing I enjoy about that system.
Another mitigation strategy could be kind of the opposite. Just embrace the fact that people are going to be absent, and as a result, you're going to need to have more players that are part of your regular scheduled games. But if more than one or two of them are gone at a time, you don't really mind because there's just so many of them.
Yeah. And then we talked about, okay, it's fine, but when it happens, what do we do? And we talked about the fact that if you're using the strategy of having more players, the best solution might be just to make they disappear and reappear whenever needed. But we mentioned more satisfying ways to deal with the problem. My favorite is to find a good reason in the story for the absence and use it as a springboard to have a better story. But that is based on the fact that it needs to be possible at this instant in the story to kind of have this detour before coming back to the main plot.
Another solution is to talk to your players and to hope or ask them to give you some kind of prop or input as to what their player is doing outside of the game and still contribute to the game session. So it could be a letter, it could be a raven, it could be a messenger that they send, or maybe they leave they do something that the players interact with, like maybe they go off and destroy a tavern that they think is the bad guy's hideout, and then the rest of the players come. And anyway, find a way for the player that's gone to still be present through their actions in the game that's happening.
Yeah, and obviously if it doesn't make sense for the character to be absent, then someone has to play it if you don't want just to disappear. So we mentioned, I think the most common way to do it is the game master does the outside of combat, the narrative ways, the narrative parts of it, and while the players take the character when it's during an encounter, combat encounter to be more precise, more about the stats, right?
And then I think one of the last things we talked about for dealing with the problem of absences is to have side quests, or even better yet, I'll use it as an opportunity to develop the backstory of various NPCs and have your players play them, or have your player play their character in the past, kind of do a time shift so that they can explore parts of their character that they haven't had the chance to do yet.
Yeah, and sometimes even as you do a story, you might fast forward through certain things that you might want to go back and revisit. I know Critical Role kind of did it with the search for Grog, so sometimes it's a good way to do it.
So I think that covers pretty much everything. We do have a community question for you guys, and it's pretty basic. I just want to know, how do you deal with player absence? Do you have a creative solution that we didn't think about yet? I'd love for you to comment down below or to reach out to us. You can follow us and comment to Twitter, or on Twitter rather. Our Twitter handle is @roll_play_chat.
Or we have an email that's contactroleplaychat@gmail.com.
I hope that you guys are enjoying our videos. We're starting to consider potentially different formats. If you do have suggestions for things that you really like, or things that maybe are a little bit less interesting to you as a viewer, Chris and I would love to know what that is. Same thing for those of you listening in podcast land. Please reach out to us. We would love to know, what parts of the show do you like? What parts do you like a little bit less? So that we can focus in on those things for you. And I think that's everything we have to talk about for today, Chris.
That's all, Matt.
Let's call it a chat.